The idea. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Copyright 2.0 show, episode number 365, a first in Copyright 2.0 show history. I do not think we have ever had a truly international edition of the show. My name is Jonathan Bailey from the site Plagiarism Today, which can be found at plagiarismtoday.com. And a reminder, Evan, we've had some technical difficulties. Please bear with us. But Evan has good reasons for his technical difficulties. He's not in his usual location today, so we are forgiving. And, well, we always forgive Evan. Evan's awesome. But, yeah, Evan, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, John. How are you?
Doing good. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. 10-year anniversary for Plagiarism Day last week. My birthday comes up in 2 days from this recording.
Mazel tov on the anniversary and happy early birthday. And you alluded to the first in Copyright 2.0 show history, and that first is that I am broadcasting from Canada, so we are technically having an international show.
Unfortunately, though, that means we cannot, you should never take Evan's advice as legal advice, but this time doubly so because he's going to be talking about Canadian law the whole time. It happens anytime Canadians go over the border. It's an unfortunate, no, that doesn't actually happen. Okay. I'm being told by my producer, of which I have none, that actually is not the case.
No, it's not.
That Evan can still speak about U.S. law just fine. Okay. Well, it was going to be interesting. And I noticed your head doesn't move side to side like on South Park and after crossing the border either.
Up and down, right. We do not convert to South Park's caricature of us. I am a big fan of South Park, and I think if I ever met the creators, Matt and Trey, they would be particularly fascinated with me because I don't know if you're a fan, but they like to make fun of gingers. Check.
Yes.
They like to make fun of Canadians. Check. They like to make fun of Jews. Check. So I'm kind of the
if you could find a way to sneak Scientology in there, you would have like Yahtzee.
Absolutely. I actually drove up to Canada. It was about a 10-hour drive. I split it up into a few days. I have a friend in advertising who I've known since high school. Stopped in New York City, had a good time with him, and then I spent a day at Schroon Lake, New York, which is my parents rented a little cottage. Went to hang out with them for a day. And I had the chance to listen to Nerdist podcast, about 6 or 7 of his episodes. Brilliant show.
Yes.
Do you ever listen?
I have listened to a few episodes, yeah.
So I got a few great ideas from their podcast that I think that just really quickly we should try to start integrating into our podcast.
All right.
And the main one is that I think we should try to get huge name celebrities to come on the show.
Oh, well, that'd be a great idea. So, Evan is our first huge name celebrity. He is from Canada. We definitely should try to get more guests on the show.
Yeah, we'll get Benedict Cumberbatch to talk about copyright law. Let's get
I'm sure.
Paul McCartney can talk about his experiences in copyright law.
Maybe we could get like Will Wheaton or one group of guys I've always wanted to sit around and talk about copyright law with are the people behind Mystery Science Theater 3000 and the Riff Tracks people. Mm-hmm. Because I bet they actually have a lot of interesting copyright stories.
I bet they do. I know that you're a fan of that series, and I haven't had the chance to watch it yet, but it's definitely up there.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of interesting copyright stories, why don't we jump into it, and you can tell our listeners what we're talking about today.
We got a very interesting and eclectic list today, more eclectic than usual for this show, I think. We're going to start off talking about Spotify, then Buck Rogers. Yes, that Buck Rogers. The Buck, you're thinking of the right one. Then probably one of the most convoluted legal settlements I can ever fathom in the Dungeons & Dragons case. A reality kitchen TV show from Australia called The Hot Plate is in copyright news. A producer named Dr. Luke is potentially going to stand trial over a backbeat, which you're going to have to take the lead on that one from a music standpoint. You're the resident musician on this show.
I'm ready for it.
All right. Then also we get to talk more about fashion as Katy Perry's Met Ball dress, which actually the Met Ball, I found out later, supports the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Apparently they have a big gala event every year. Lots of celebrities come out, and a graffiti artist is rather cross about the dress she wore. And Fox News had a bit of a copyright blunder last week. And apparently some parents are a little cranky at one of the official Beijing Olympic songs for sounding a bit too much like Let It Go from Frozen. I think we should not let the lawyers take this one. I think the parents will handle it for us. I really don't think there's any need to get the law involved. But you ready to dive in?
I'm ready to dive in.
All right. Starting off with Spotify. Now, this was an interesting story. It came out last week that Spotify, is in a bit of a crunch right now. As you know, it needs licenses from the major record labels. In this case, there are 3 major record labels. And those licenses are up for renewal October 1st. Tick tock, dudes. Seriously. But apparently the negotiations are not going super well. And part of that is Spotify may be backing down from its, I guess you would say, its stance of having the free tier all have access to everything. And instead, we'll be looking to place some restrictions on what free users can and cannot listen to in the app. It will be a first for Spotify since they made the free tier mobile, and basically, dropped any restrictions other than you having to listen to ads on the free tier.
Well, I think you and I both spoken about our endearment for Spotify. We think it's a good service. We're both premium content subscribers. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully, it doesn't change for us. But, I've had the chance to speak about this with a few friends, and a lot of them are ad or non-premium members. So they're going to lose access. And this could be, a watershed moment for Spotify, or even a watershed moment for the industry, because it seems that what's the expression, that the rooster, what's the expression where it's supposed to mean the time is up, and something with like a rooster coming home.
Rooster is crowing or something?
Yeah, something like that. All right, well, maybe we'll find a better one, but
roosters come to roost.
Yeah, yes.
Come to roost. Yes.
Come to roost. Okay, well, we're getting closer.
We're getting there. I promise you. By the end of this podcast, we will have one idiom out of our mouth.
So it's crunch time for them, because they have no signed deals with the 3 major labels.
Yeah. And
their deals expire in a few months, and it seems that the finances are finally going to have to make sense. Yeah, and so even though the CEO of Spotify has gone on record multiple times against this gating of content, and that he really hates it. He wants it, all the same access, and ads were, supposed to make the difference. It turns out that maybe it's time, because we need the money.
Well, I ran the numbers a while ago based upon some old data. And basically what I found roughly was that one paying customer, you or me, because we're both paying customers, equals 29 free customers.
Wow.
In terms of revenue generated. So our $10 per month basically, almost equals a classroom full of non-paying subscribers or free tier users.
Yes. And this just in, John, I remember what it is. It's the chickens have come home to roost.
There we go. We got it.
We got it.
Yeah, and that's what's happening to Spotify right now is they are in a position where, like you said, the finances have to make sense, and they don't right now. The free tier makes up the vast majority of the users, according to little bar graphs here on Digital Music News. As of this year, I would say well over 2/3. Yeah, well over 2/3, almost three quarters of all Spotify subscribers are free, and they are making up only something like 10% of the revenue.
So it's time to start incentivizing users to go on to the premium content, and this could be really good for Apple, who maybe have the ability to front more free users, and maybe it could work out for Spotify if the content kind of ends up in this perfect storm of being not so available on piracy sites, so that the free users don't kind of flock away from Spotify, and at the same time the gated content is not so unavailable so quickly, so that they can kind of transition users into it, so that they don't lose them all so quickly. There was talks of maybe a few songs being available, but not the whole album, and that way they could keep the casual people who are like, okay, I'm kind of okay with only having these 2 main songs, and then incentivizing people who are really dedicated to artists into paying Spotify and thus the artists a little bit more for the rest of their album.
Yeah. And one of the things that I hear a lot whenever this conversation comes up is something you just alluded to about, well, if they start restricting the free tier, I'll just go back to piracy. I'll just go back to pirating content and so on and so forth. But if my numbers are even remotely accurate, like I said, they were based upon old data, then even if 28 Spotify customers go back to piracy and don't contribute anything to the music economy, there's a net gain if the 29th signs on.
Right. I think there's a net gain in the short term, but like so many other tech and internet companies, a lot of the value is implied, right? And Snapchat doesn't generate $17 billion. That its valuation makes sense. Doesn't generate the kind of revenue that in the traditional sense it would have a $17 billion valuation. It has this giant customer base, and that has implied value if it can grow moving forward, and if you could monetize it moving forward. And so, if a lot of these free users leave, I think even though in the short term it may result in a net gain, I think you're going to end up seeing trouble for Spotify.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, the core of this conflict is Spotify is still trying to improve its on paper valuation, where the record labels, they want to see the revenue coming in.
Yep. And
that's where you're having this conflict. And the record labels have a interest in Spotify. They took a deal. They have partial interest in Spotify, but it's such a low percentage. It's like 3 to 5% per label or something like that. It's basically a token stake that they're far, far, far more interested in those raw revenues and getting those numbers up. And I think honestly, gating the content can be done in such a way that that users don't leave en masse to go back to pirate sources. Like, for example, when Taylor Swift pulled her content out of Spotify, it didn't cause this epic wave of people leaving to go back to the Pirate Bay. It just didn't happen. So it can be done, and the previous battles have shown it can be done. It's just a matter of finding the correct way to do it. So that's what they're working on. Buck Rogers.
Yes.
Seems like we're talking public domain a lot lately between this and Happy Birthday, but this one's interesting.
I'm actually totally fine talking about, the public domain. That's actually one of my favorite terms. And, I've had the chance to do a little bit more reading in the area lately. We've been talking about it. And, kind of searching for how the public domain as a term is perceived to the general public has been an interesting little adventure I've been on lately. And, it kind of leads me to conclude that, it really is a very treacherous term. So what I found is that online, when people talk about it, how does Wikipedia talk about it, it's really a colloquialism that a lot of people use to denote a work that has no intellectual property rights attached to it.
Yeah.
And, that's wrong, unfortunately. At least in its, traditional sense, there's a term of art in copyright law that, means that this is no longer in copyright. And so that more of a side note on that. Just because something may be in the copyright public domain, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no intellectual property rights attached to it. And that's an angle we should keep in mind when we're going through the story about Buck Rogers' status in copyright.
Yeah, and we talked about similar things with Sherlock Holmes, for example.
Yeah. So we have a 1928 novella, Armageddon 2419 AD.
That's back when they knew how to name a novella. You have to admit that is a name.
That is a strong name.
That is a strong name for a sci-fi book. I'm just saying. Anyway, sorry.
So it's about the story of Buck Rogers. Very quickly.
Well, Anthony Rogers at the time, but yeah.
Is about a man frozen in time for 500 years, and he's awoken in the middle of an Earth civil war, and so. It's a great concept. So, especially with the success of sci-fi and comic book style movies, obviously this is something that I think many a studio would be interested in making.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, John.
And everyone's doing reboots and retreads anyway, so it makes sense to revisit one of the most iconic characters that for some reason has not gotten a lot of attention, though he was featured in the first Ted movie.
That's right. I forgot about that part. Buck Rogers. Oh man, I thought Ted was brilliant. I mean,
I had not seen the sequel. I did like the first one a lot, though.
I haven't seen the sequel either. Anyways, we digress. Sorry. So,
no, wait, it wasn't Buck Rogers. It was Flash Gordon.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It was Flash Gordon. Oh my god.
Flash Gordon.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So apparently, Buck Rogers is such a forgettable character. The one major movie mentioned in recent decades was actually Flash Gordon. Oh my god.
So John, do you have the name of the studio on hand that is trying to make the new Buck Rogers?
No, I do not actually. In the PDF, I'm guessing. Let me pull up the full lawsuit. I just closed that. Oh, it's Team Angry Filmworks.
That's right. It was something strange. Okay, Team Angry Filmworks has
that's actually the name of the company. Team Angry Filmworks Incorporated, a California corporation.
Yes, and so they attempted to get a license from the heirs of Buck Rogers, who are the beneficiaries of a trust that operates his estate and his intellectual property. And so this trust holds itself out as the people who can license Buck Rogers' intellectual property. And so that fell through. And, after doing a little research, the team at Angry Filmworks have filed for declaratory relief, arguing that the novella and, by extension, the character and the story elements from that novella are in the public domain.
Right.
So we've talked about this before. Declaratory relief is the situation where the person who would normally be the defendant in a copyright lawsuit will file preemptively to have a court declare in a declaratory judgment that X, Y, and Z is the case. So in this case, they're asking for the court to declare that this novella is in the public domain and that they do have the right to use the character and the story elements that existed in that novella. They're alleging that the work fell into the public domain in 1956 after failure to renew, and worldwide in 2010. Like most laws, copyrights can have different statuses in different parts of the world. Yeah. As there are different copyright regimes, although there are certain measures in place to have that become uniform. That's not always the case. And so, they did this in response to that trust allegedly writing to them, threatening to proceed with legal action, as permission had not been given. You didn't pay us, and so that's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, we've been seeing this a lot lately with disputes from content around this time. Hearing some Canadian authorities, I think.
Yes.
Wait, you have police in Canada?
We do have police in Canada.
I thought it was just all peaceful and everyone loved one another and there was no crime.
Oh, maybe it's a fire truck. You're right. We do
maybe.
That is all true.
Okay.
So one of the things that they're after, which explains why a lot of people do these preemptive suits, is that they're looking for an injunction basically enjoining the family trust from asserting any rights, because the last thing you want to do is put more money into a project and then have that project actually stopped in its tracks. It's one thing to discuss whether there should be a licensing payment owed, or to litigate copyright afterwards is maybe not as bad, but the concept of having your production stopped or your showing stopped is that absolutely the game breaker that makes you want to file to have a declaratory judgment made. Yeah,
and we've seen these declaratory judgments lawsuits before, like the Blurred Lines case was one.
Mm-hmm.
So these are actually fairly common, and it usually comes after one side has been harassing the other, like what was accused here.
Exactly.
Hitting them up, and basically what they're saying is, we want this over with, we want this resolved, we want to be able to move forward with our project. Now, and as you noted, though, even if the book and the story is in the public domain, as we learned in the Sherlock Holmes case, that may not be as simple as the Buck Rogers character is in the public domain.
Right, because when I looked at the complaint, they were asking for a declaratory judgment in copyright law, and that doesn't necessarily clear you. We'd have to look at what this trust is doing. Is there any sort of a significant trademark, a business?
Yeah, about to say, what's the trademark status?
What's the trademark status? And if is there a clothing line? Is there something that may lead you into trouble? Is there significant sales in another area that we may not know about? So that's something I thought we had to keep in mind. The second thing that I thought was most interesting about this case is that we have to remember that the public domain status of a work kind of cuts both ways, right?
Right.
Because they're going to be creating a new work, and they're going to want to protect that work.
Yes.
The whole point of copyright law, as we say all the time, is to be able to monetize your creation, monetize your work. So I had the chance to look into what happens when a new derivative work is made.
Yeah.
Can you get copyright in that derivative work? That wouldn't be very fair if something finally falls into the public domain, and then someone makes a movie using the same story, and then there's a new copyright on that story. That doesn't quite make sense. And so the basics of it is that once a story and once a character enters into the public domain, it's free to use. A quick caveat for all those other intellectual property rights. Those obviously have to be not claimed as well. But even if this movie was made and it was a huge success, Joe somebody can still make his own Buck Rogers movie.
Yeah.
So the copyright that ends up in this, let's say, remake ends up being a fairly thin copyright, and they only get a really ownership interest in the new elements that they've added to the story that add only, and this is a court's language, that add anything that adds, quote, enough expressive variation from the public domain or other existing works that enables this new work to be readily distinguishable from its predecessors. So any new elements, those become the property of, in this case, it would be Angry Filmworks.
Are you familiar with the movie Return to Oz?
I'm not.
It's actually very interesting. I'm sure you've seen The Wizard of Oz.
I have.
The film. I think you're not allowed to be alive and not have seen that film at this point in time. Okay, Wizard of Oz is based upon the Oz books, the original Oz books, which fell into the public domain way before that movie was made. They were actually quite old books. L. Frank Baum wrote those books, and basically they fell into the public domain. By the way, read them if you get the chance. They're like 99 cents in the Kindle store. Seriously, it's worth the read. Well, MGM produced that story. And what basically happened is Disney wanted to come along and do a sequel to it. And since the books were in the public domain, they could do that, but they had to be careful to avoid various things that were in the first film that were not actually in the books, or limit their use of them, because the MGM film does take some, I guess we'll say, some liberties with the source material. So they had to be mindful of that as they went into it. Like one of the big changes in the Disney film that actually did make, one of the big changes in the MGM film that did make it into the Disney film is the ruby slippers. In the original story, they were silver, but they were changed to ruby because they would show up better in Technicolor.
Really?
Yeah, so stuff like that had to be done very, very carefully. And because of that, Return to Oz actually stays a lot closer to the books than Wizard of Oz did. It's also a very, very creepy and eerie movie. It's nothing in common with the tone of the original. If you go into it expecting a happy, fun, everyone singing fest, and Scarecrow does a silly dance, you're going to be really, really disappointed. But I love Return to Oz. It's one of my favorite movies. But yeah, it's that issue of you do get to control what new you add, and you do get to control your specific expression of the idea, but the story itself,
you certainly you're certainly not able to monopolize the character.
No,
and so
no. If Team Angry Filmworks or whatever wants to go through and make it, and then Universal Pictures says the next day that they want to make their own Buck Rogers film, if the story's in the public domain, they can, and there's nothing stopping them.
Exactly. You know,
you could actually have multiple
new movies. Unfortunately, or you know, I hope I'm wrong about this, but unfortunately, there will be a new.
You know, this has got to be one of the most convoluted cases I have ever heard of, and it all hinges on some very poor contract writing back in the day.
Yeah,
because clarity is everything in a contract.
That's right, and
someone was not clear.
When a contract has a reversionary clause, which means that if X is not met, then Y happens, or in this case, Y is the reversion of rights, which basically means that the rights return to the person who has initially signed them away, which in this case is the rights to the Dungeons and Dragons movie from a company called Sweet Pea.
Yeah.
When you have something like that, things should be crystal clear. They were not, and as a result, what we got was, in my opinion, years in litigation, but a very, very cool case.
Yeah, it is
about what a sequel means, and it reminds me of all kinds of dinner table conversations about reboots versus remakes versus sequels, like what's what, the kind of thing that film students are always talking about. Actually, on the topic of the Nerdist podcast, I heard Chris Pratt and Chris Hardwick talking about the concept of reboots versus sequels, because when they made The Lost World, it wasn't necessarily a reboot, but it wasn't necessarily a sequel. So they had an interesting debate about it.
Yeah.
Anyways, John, do you want to bring us quickly up to speed on who owns who and the fact of this story?
Long story short, Dungeons & Dragons, tabletop game played by nerds and virgins everywhere. And I know I was one of them. I include myself. They sold initially the film rights back in 1994 to a company called Sweet Pea Entertainment. You just mentioned Sweet Pea's all one word. They went out and made the absolutely atrocious abomination of a film, the 1990s Dungeons & Dragons movie. Well, decades passed. Some people apparently forgot. I don't know who these people are. And now some pretty big players want access to these rights. Specifically, Warner Brothers wanted access to the rights.
Right, and I think even before they wanted access to the rights, they have had a script. They have a script commission, so a script has been written.
Yeah, it's called Chainmail, tentatively. And those titles are tentative. That may never come to fruition. But
right. From the gentleman who wrote Wrath of the Titans, which was not a terrible film, produced by Roy Lee, who produced the Lego Movie and How to Train Your Dragon. So films. We're talking,
potential.
The sights are high, they're set high.
I'm optimistic about that. And so they turned to Universal. They turned to Hasbro first. But Hasbro sort of listened to the offer and said, we're going with Universal. But then Warner said, but wait a minute, you licensed the rights to Sweet Pea. We will just relicense them from Sweet Pea. But then Hasbro said that they felt the rights had reverted to them from Sweet Pea because their contract with Sweet Pea had a clause that said they had to make a sequel every so often. I don't know how many years it was. They had to make them very regularly, basically, in order to retain the rights. And as you and I know, there was only one of these films released in theaters, thank you God. And the Wayans did not reunite to try to further ruin the Dungeons & Dragons series. But Sweet Pea said, but wait, we did all of these Dungeons & Dragons movies for the Sci-Fi Channel. I kid you not. The home of Sharknado, folks.
So, sorry. Sweet Pea is the company that Warner bought. And Sweet Pea Sweet Pea licensed out to Hasbro, who was owned by Universal to make the film. So it's Warner, who now owns Sweet Pea, is now arguing on behalf of Sweet Pea that Hasbro, who is who's owned by is it Universal? Universal no longer owns it, and so we've had there's been a long case, and let's. I think I actually have the language here is that the requirement was every 5 years, I believe, was, in order to retain the rights, is that one, they had to commence principal photography of a sequel, which is defined as the term is commonly understood in the industry, which
it is not commonly understood anymore.
So that has to be that has to be based on the picture and the picture creations, which means the character, story, plot lines, themes, or elements of that movie, or in this case, of the first Dungeons and Dragons movie. And 3, they have to pay Hasbro the applicable rights for the release. Yeah. And so that was the contract language, as the key contract language. And, we've had a long trial here, a lot of evidence coming forward. Some of the key points being that in emails between the two, which can be used to indicate intent or indicate how language can be interpreted if it's ambiguous. Sweet Pea was fairly clear that the second movie cannot be wholly unrelated to the first movie, which was the case when these 2 TV movies which were made. And this is quite the interesting lesson that apparently movie studios make movies just to keep rights.
Yes.
And not.
Haven't you heard about the 1994 Fantastic Four movie?
I'm unfortunately hearing about it now because of how bad this one is.
Yeah.
They're comparing it to that one.
Yeah, someone posted the trailer online. It was made for $1.7 million in 2 months, basically.
Right.
So yeah, it's pretty bad. I've seen the trailer, and I've apparently you can find pirated copies online, but I've not bothered with it. The trailer was more than enough suck. It was all I could take.
So Warner, on behalf of Sweet Pea, brought in a lot of good evidence about how these 2 sequels shouldn't count and that the rights should have reverted back. But then, at the same time, Hasbro and Universal are like, okay, well, have you ever heard of the concept called estoppel? You let us make the movies. We made the movies, and we paid you for the movies. So how can you come back now and say that these movies don't count? You can't sit on your rights like that. This is estoppel is an equitable concept, which is basically that you're asking a judge to kind of look past the legal finer points and asking him to look at the whole picture and saying that you can't possibly rule in their favor because even if they are right, they've sat on their rights and this is completely unfair, and that any unreasonable person who acted in their way should be stopped, which is a legal term, basically means stopped from asserting their rights now. So in the end, what has happened is that after a long trial,
in October,
urged them to settle and be like, listen, I really would rather not, come down either way here. Please come to an agreement. And in the end, after months of negotiation, they have come to an agreement. So the rights to the film have been allowed. So I don't think we're really clear on whether they've been transferred or licensed, but the movie will happen. And so, hold on to your hats, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to see another.
I wanted to ask you about that as a lawyer, because this is something that's out of my wheelhouse. How common is that for a judge to go through everything, all the discovery, have the trial, and go, I'm not ruling, and you guys take some time before I rule? I mean.
You know what? I haven't taken part in a ton of litigation, myself, but I do try to read up on it, and I also hear a lot. From my impression is that settlement is always pushed by a judge in almost every facet of litigation, whether it be criminal, they want plea deals to clear up the docket. Civil litigation, they want settlements to clear up the docket, and especially in high profile cases, judges like to use their minor bully pulpit to gain attention to themselves and kind of like get things done in unusual fashion and say, I'd like this to happen this way, I'd like this to happen this way, and so maybe this is one of those cases, but maybe this is just your run-of-the-mill. Please, for the love of God, settle. You're wasting everyone's time.
I don't really want to write this. I don't want to write my ruling out. It takes a long time, but yeah, to get to the point after. I mean, literally, they'd been through the whole trial. Both sides had presented their evidence. They'd done everything. It was obviously not a jury trial. It was a bench trial.
Mm-hmm.
But still, obviously, they'd been through the whole motions of the trial. Usually, one of the points of settlement is to avoid a trial. But then again, technically, I guess the point of settlement is to avoid the unpredictability of a ruling.
You know what? You're both correct. And, anytime you settle, you can't look at it like, oh my God, we've already spent all this money on litigation. Yeah. Generally, anytime you settle, you got to look at it as the dollars and cents that you're saving moving forward. Because even if it does come down with a ruling, there could be,
appeals and
trial procedure issues and appeals, et cetera, et cetera. So anytime you're settling, you got to cut your losses kind of deal. If you go to the poker table with $2,000 and you're down to $1,000, and you're like, oh, if I leave now, I'm down $1,000. But if you leave now, you got $1,000 in your pocket. So sometimes you got to cut your losses.
Well, that, and in this case, I don't think it behooved anyone to have these rights tied up.
No, it did not.
It did not behoove anyone in this, because there's money to be made here, unfortunately, on a Dungeons and Dragons film. But hopefully a good one this time. It'd be nice to actually get something good off of this.
It would be great. It would be great for all the nerd and virgin kind.
Exactly. And I would, if I hear it's good, I would probably go. I did not go to the earlier one. I avoided it, and I am eternally grateful.
So, yeah, I agree. This next story we have is very, very odd. I find it quite fascinating that they were claiming copyright ownership in the cooking show format.
Yeah,
there's so many of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, even here in the United States, I mean, Ellie here loves her cooking show, so I can probably name about a dozen cooking competition shows off the top of my head. Everything. I mean, like half of Food Network is cooking reality shows and competitions.
Yes, Channel 9's reality cooking show with a hot plate. It will stay on the air, although a rival network, Channel 7, claimed that it was a ripoff of their My Kitchen Rules show, and asked the judge for an injunction to get it off the air, which was denied, which is not surprising. As we said earlier, an injunction is a massive step, and it is an equitable analysis where a judge kind of looks at the balance of equities. What's the public interest? What's the private interest? Does it really serve the interests of fairness to have something taken off the air? And it's hard to show that things are so obviously ripped off, and I'm getting so much damage that judge, please irrevocably damage them.
Yeah.
So that was denied, but the judge in this case did not dismiss the case entirely. He's going to let it go to a jury. So we had what was called summary judgment, in which the standard is whether a reasonable juror can find one way or the other, and he feels like he can. The protectable interests that they're alleging exist here are funny to me. Let's see. Here are the things that they like or here are the things that they claim are being copied, which in its essence is arguing that they're protectable, because obviously if you're copying someone's
copyrightable,
if you're saying that someone is copying you, you're saying that the things that you're doing are protectable. The use of stereotyped couples as competitors, including, quote, the gay couple, quote, the father and son team, quote, the unexpected friends. What else? That there was an escalating, quote, sense of jeopardy which accompanied the preparation of food, and the fact that the results, good or bad, were then served in the competitor's private domain, whatever that means.
I'm sorry, this is every cooking show.
Every cooking show. So
I don't think I know a single cooking show without the gay couple. two people teams that doesn't have the gay couple and the father-son team or the mother-daughter team.
I think that may be a little less common, but first of all, every race has the quote. What's it called?
Amazing Race.
Amazing Race. Always has those type of teams together, and the impending sense of jeopardy when the food is coming and they haven't, and it's not ready yet. That's every cooking show, and so
that is every reality show, not just every cooking show.
These are scène à faire, which is a copyright term for common scenes, common stock things that are not protectable. But this judge has ruled that they should have the right to convince a jury that some of these elements are unique and proprietary, and that their competitors' cooking show is too close and thus should be taken off the air. And I think a jury will laugh this off. I think a good trial team can talk about the concepts of scène à faire and talk about the concepts of stock issues and have that area of the law explained to the jury. And then I think a jury on its own will know that it's seen 100 shows like this. So how are you claiming copyright ownership over
well,
these,
and that's and I'll say this. I hope this doesn't reach the jury, because I would not want to be on any jury that has to watch that much cooking reality TV for that in that environment.
Especially because I don't think they feed them very well.
No, they don't. Believe I've actually sat on a murder case. I know how well they get fed. It's not particularly great.
Well, the only thing I would look forward to in this trial would be like the puns if I was actually litigating it. Like, my opposing counsel wants you to stomach the idea.
Oh God.
That. All right, I'll stop.
Oh God. Oh God. But we say send it back to the kitchen. Yes.
Send the meal back. Oh God, I can come up with a whole bunch of good ones.
You mean, this is a very, very, very rare idea that they have here.
That's a good one.
It could go on forever. Yeah, and the idea of an injunction. When I first heard about it, this is sort of an updated. They were denied the injunction super quick. I think it's because, like you said, there's no way they're being irreparably harmed here. Because that's the point of damages, is to fix stuff like that,
I agree.
There are things damages can fix and things damages can't fix. I understand that. This is on the things damages can fix. And I don't think there was any reason, even if it was a tremendous ripoff, to deny an injunction.
Anyway. I agree. So let's continue on, from the ludicrous to the insane.
Backbeats.
So before we jump into it, we'll explain it really quickly. This case is about the ownership of what, in my opinion, is the most common beat line in all of music.
It's definitely one of the most common beat lines, I would say. I mean, especially in rap and hip hop music. But
yeah, I remember doing beatboxing with friends. The boom, 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 boom. Let's play it really quickly here for the listeners of what the beat which is at the center of this controversy between the producers of Black Heat by Zimba Koo and a Jessie J song, and as the link that you sent me demonstrates a number of other songs. I'm going to play it right now. Boom, boom. So that's the beat that we're talking about now. We'll listen quickly to Jessie J's price tag.
Moonheads and P.
Boom.
You ready?
You can barely hear it in the background, eh? But yeah, now I can. That's much more clear that time around.
The sale comes first and the truth comes second. Just stop for a minute and smile. Why is everybody...
So yeah, the audio will come in a little bit better, I think, when we get my mic.
Sorry,
synced up.
I've got his future mic right here. I've got to get it in the mail to him. But yes, so I'll remember. So that backbeat, apparently, as you noted, was from a 1975 composition, Zimba Koo, by the band Black Heat. And it's been very widely used. The link here has a dozen different songs, and I'm sure there's countless others out there that have used that beat. But the pop producer Dr. Luke Gottwald is being sued. Apparently, he inserted that beat, and is the reason it's in the Jessie J song price tag. And the judge has allowed it to go forward.
Yeah, he is denied to rule as a matter of law that this was not copyright infringement.
Yeah.
That this was not copyright infringement.
Yeah, you said you were right the first time. You're okay.
So this will move forward, and the jury will be tasked with essentially the copyrightability issue here as part of the litigation, as well as the substantial similarity afterwards of this drum beat, because that's the main similarity here. This is the kind of stuff that makes me, just shake my head.
Yeah. Well, people talked about the Blurred Lines case, like that was going to blow up music and destroy the music industry and all that.
This actually could. Yeah.
This possibly could. Blurred Lines was a very fact-specific and very poorly litigated case, I think.
It was two unique songs
Yeah.
up against one another.
Yeah.
This is a very basic element of one song and a very basic element of another song that are also used in tons of other songs as the central element here.
Even if just the facts of this case, it would still be impacting dozens, if not hundreds, of other works.
Absolutely.
Possibly thousands of other works. So, I mean, if they get a win here, if the New Old Music Group, which is the name of the company that's the plaintiff in this case, if they get a win here, that affects probably hundreds of other works, if not thousands. That could be very destructive.
When I look at this from a purely theoretical place, leaving it in a jury's hands is very dangerous because it's first of all, if they can show that it was an actual sample, that's good for the plaintiff. Like it was taken exactly, so that's good for them. And then they're going to explain the standard of copyright, which is a modicum of creativity. From a purely theoretical perspective, from an academic perspective, it becomes a gray issue about what is a modicum of creativity when it comes to a drum beat, and who knows what a jury will say when it comes to. So I don't know if that actually came out on my mic, but good.
It did.
So this isn't going to be I know we say this a lot, but this will be a very interesting one to follow, and I'd love to see what the lawyers are going to come up with in arguing that this is a protectable expression. When it comes to drum beats. And so this case, it would be something that I would love to even go see in person. I don't know where they're litigating, but it's certainly something that I'm going to keep a personal eye out for when it comes to transcripts.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting case. And like I said, I think this one actually is a dangerous case, too. This one actually does have even me worried a little bit just because of the potential to really shake up how music is written and licensed and produced.
I just think more than that, it's just a bad look for copyright law.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
For people who understand what copyright law is supposed to do, and it can be easily caricatured by the copyleft and those who don't believe in intellectual property ownership as it can be used as the mascot.
Yeah, and it's almost like being able to copyright just a single sentence in a long essay or something, or even a very common sentence. You know what I mean?
To me, it's like worse for sure, way worse than the Twitter joke copyright status.
Oh, yeah.
It's like copywriting a word. It's that basic of a beat, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's very, very fundamental, and it's potentially very dangerous. And putting it in the hands of a jury makes me worry.
Let's talk.
Let's talk something happier. Katy Perry. We all love Katy Perry. Love her, love Katy
Perry. If you're listening,
Katy, we love you.
Sometime. No, yeah, we love you.
Join us on the podcast. Yeah, come talk copyright with us. Yeah, Katy Perry apparently was at the Met ball recently in a lovely black dress. I'm not much of a fashionista, but it's quite attractive black dress. But it's got a graffiti style print like on the bottom part of it, from what I can tell in this photograph. Mm-hmm. Which they picked a very interesting photograph in this article in The Guardian.
Is someone asking to marry her?
I have no idea who that person is. All I know is that's Katy Perry. But apparently an artist who goes by the name Rhyme, R-I-M-E, his real name is Joseph Tierney, has filed a copyright infringement suit against the designer of that dress, Jeremy Scott, alleging that it rips off basically a graffiti he painted on a Detroit building.
That's right.
Gets into a lot of interesting questions very quickly.
Well, this seems like a pretty straightforward situation to me. We talked, I think, last week about the copyright status of fashion, and that generally the actual design of a dress and the way it's shaped and et cetera cannot be copywritten. Mm-hmm, yeah. There are issues when it comes to the useful article concept of copyright law, in which is one of the built-in protections for the useful the useful things that we need to use.
You can't copyright a hammer,
basically. Exactly. So this is an issue of the print. And the print and the design and the art on a dress is copyrightable, is subject to intellectual property, and especially so when it's a unique design, and with the Mona Lisa on a shirt, is going to be well, obviously the Mona Lisa is not copywritten because it was made 200 years ago, but like that's the kind of example of when you take something very specific. If you would take what's a better example,
like a Jackson Pollock painting or something.
Exactly, something that's still under copyright, and you reproduce that exactly. That's a clear situation in which you have a straight, normal reproduction of a copywritten item, and so you have a violation.
Well, I'd take a moment to apologize to Crystal for mentioning Jackson Pollock's name on the podcast. She will not be happy about that, but that's okay.
Well, I'm glad she listens.
But yeah, it is a fairly straightforward case in that regard. But it was interesting because when I first put this out on Twitter and started talking about it, someone responded saying, "How can you copyright graffiti?" And I'm like, well, there are some limitations to what we think of with copyright graffiti. For one, the what we think of as the moral rights in the United States, like the Visual Artists Rights Act, VARA, does not apply to graffiti because the property owner can destroy your creative work without your permission, basically, because it's on their property. But graffiti, for intents and purposes, is the same as a doodle on a napkin in that regard. It's still, the actual artwork is copyrighted.
That's right. I would respond to that person, what's the difference between someone graffitiing from the creation of the art perspective than to someone painting onto what do you call that thing?
A mural.
A mural? No, not a mural.
A canvas?
Canvas. That's right. That's the word I'm looking for.
Wow, I was going too far.
There is none. Other than, of course, maybe the trespassing issue for the artist.
And like I said, the fact that the building owner is free to destroy your graffiti if he so chooses.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you don't have a right of indestructibility in copyright. Not one of the exclusive rights.
Well, you do want the Visual Rights Act does grant certain privileges to visual artists that are unique to visual arts, and one of them is the ability. Basically, it tries to apply moral rights, what we think of as moral rights in other countries, and to certain types of very limited set of visual artworks in the United States. And one of them is that they cannot be destroyed without permission of the creator, but that you lose that. We found the judges have actually weighed in on this and said that the property owner's rights in the building and the property outweighs the graffiti artist's rights and their moral rights.
So, that's something I'm gonna look at.
The Visual Artists Rights Act, VARA, is what it's called. And that's where all that comes from.
Yeah, I haven't had the chance to look into that one yet. So
you Canadians, you Canadians, it's you have all moral. You think you have a moral rights regime in Canada? I don't know.
I'm still a U.S. lawyer, so. Still a little embarrassing to get schooled, but
no. Well, VARA is kind of a niche thing. VARA is very, very niche. I admit. But anyways, yeah, let's talk about Fox News and the presidential debate, but not actually the presidential debate itself.
Can we? I had such a good time.
Yeah, you did. You did. You watched it?
I did.
I was encouraged to play a drinking game through it, and I decided my liver couldn't take it, so I opted to not do that. But yes, we actually looked up the rules for the drinking game here, and it's like, yeah, if I pick Donald Trump, I'm going to be going to the hospital with alcohol poisoning in the first half an hour.
Well, maybe if the rules are drink every time Donald Trump says something that's gonna shake up the media, then you're gonna drink all the time.
Well, there was one set that said every time Donald Trump says something vaguely sexist. And it's like, yeah, you see that whole exchange of making, I'd be dead.
Anytime he shrugs and does his trademark, I am who I am. That would have been a good one too. So the story here is that the Fox live stream was overwhelmed.
Did not go so well for them.
Did not go so well. They were not expecting as many viewers. I mean, who was? They got something like 23 or 24 million viewers, which is like 10 times what they usually get for a primary debate. And so their stream went down. Cord cutters and other eager internet users quickly tried to find another way to watch it, one of which was the Sky News stream, which is owned by Fox's parent company. So they're brothers, as you would maybe try to analogize. But then something happened. What was that?
And that is that Fox News filed a DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, takedown notice and got the Sky News, their brother's live stream yanked from YouTube. It was being hosted on YouTube, and that brought an end to that. And apparently it happened near the end of the debate, what they're saying, like in the last 20 to 30 minents or so.
Yeah,
So,
I'm curious. I'm very curious to know why this wasn't a license. There was no license here. Like, I can't believe that this wasn't worked out beforehand. And you know what? I'm also kind of a little surprised that everyone is so up in arms about this happening because, they're owned by the same parent company. Shouldn't it all be, dandy? Well, no. A lot of the times, companies that have ownership relationships still compete against each other.
Yeah.
If you're the president of one, you're going to run your company, the same way as you would run. You're going to run your company when you're competing against another entity the same way as if the other entity was not your, quote unquote brother.
Yeah, a good example is the Boston Globe versus the New York Times.
Right.
Technically owned by the same company, but they obviously compete, and I seriously doubt New York Times would be at all happy about the Boston Globe yanking their stories.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it would result in copyright litigation or if they would just run to Daddy and Daddy would solve it internally. But there would be a tiff, is what I'm saying. There would be a tiff. And it could be similar here, but I do think Sky News had a legitimate right to stream it. I don't think they would have had it, especially a YouTube stream, going without permission. What I think happened, honestly, was just that there was a mistake made in filing what had to have been dozens, if not hundreds, of DMCA notices to shut down live streams of the debate.
Wow. I mean,
so it was a mistake. It was a screw up. It was a bad screw up, but these things happen. I mean, the news this week is all about the movie Pixels and how they filed a DMCA notice against their own trailer, which, by the way, might have actually helped them sell tickets to the movie Pixels. But
wait, what happened?
Yeah, the movie Pixels, Columbia Pictures, right? The new movie Pixels, the Adam Sandler flick, which actually has voxels in it, not pixels. Thank you very much. Filed a bunch of DMCA takedown notices with Vimeo, and a lot of them were against like independent films that had the name Pixel in it somewhere, but they actually ended up DMCAing their own official trailer, which was hosted on Vimeo.
That's funny.
So, it's mistakes happen, and some are more embarrassing than others.
That's a little bit embarrassing.
That's really embarrassing. But like I said, removing the trailer was probably the best promotion the movie could get right now. Just deny. Do not show that Adam Sandler is in this film. We will sell way more tickets.
I saw reading the reviews about that. Like, I think that my favorite one was like titled like "Someone Stop Adam Sandler" or something like that. I did not see it, and I don't plan to.
Yeah, it was really bad because when I saw the movie poster, like the movie poster which shows like Pac-Man eating like New York or whatever it was, I'm like, oh, that looks kind of cool. I kind of like that. And then I saw the actual trailer with Adam Sandler and the idea. I'm like, oh, that looks a lot less cool. So yeah, it's I've heard nothing but bad things about it. What is it, man? I was also excited about the Fantastic Four movie, but now all the reviews for that are terrible too.
I just don't think the Fantastic Four are a good story. I mean, maybe the whole concept of a man turning into like a whole bunch of rocks and then like still kind of being day-to-day guy, like that's ridiculous. Like and like the radiation turning them into like, I don't know. I just don't buy it. I guess some of the other stories have. Well,
and I think the problem I have with the Fantastic Four is, other than Thing, the characters, which is the rock guy, the characters are kind of weak. A stretchy guy, a girl who can turn invisible, and a guy who's on fire.
Yeah.
It's not particularly great. I mean,
the Thing.
I know who I'm turning to solve my problems. The guy with rocks for fists.
Yes.
That seems like the shortcut to all my problems.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just, it doesn't seem like a good team.
Well,
that was the thing about the X-Men, was you had a really good variety of interesting powers,
yes,
interesting characters, and you don't seem to have that with the Fantastic Four.
Well, something that the Fantastic Four could maybe solve for us is help us against the Chinese, right?
Yeah, this is really, really interesting. And then this one actually lit up my Twitter feed with some people asking me about this. Beijing is hosting the Olympics in 2022 because, they only had hosted one 14 years prior. It's okay. Interestingly, they're hosting a Winter Olympics in a place that gets almost no snow. So, just saying, and in a place that 14 years prior, in 2008, hosted a Summer Olympics. You can't have it both ways, Beijing.
I can't believe that we're going back there, but they have decided to commission an opening song.
Yeah, and a bunch of official songs, and one of which I think will become the opening song. And one of them, entitled, the English translation is "The Snow and Ice Dance," is one of the 10 official songs. Apparently borrows very, very heavily from "Let It Go," and there's an interesting little YouTube video where on the New York Times here they've embedded a YouTube comparison video. That
do you want to play it for us?
See, I don't know if I can get it to come through my speakers. Do you have yeah, you were able to get through your speakers pretty trivially. Here.
Hey guys,
I listened to this before the guy liked to talk.
Yeah.
Bear with me, 47 seconds. Okay, here we go.
Let me know in the comments down below.
I think it compares them here in like 5 or 6 seconds. So this is like,
I just love that.
有些在下，穿着美外大后衫，一幅画，整装待放，约定天地之大。Don't let them in, don't let them see. Be the good girl, you always have to be. 激情的约会，有情召唤。
And if you're playing along at home, it's not that the music singer switched from Chinese to English. Those were actually the two songs side by side.
songs.
And yeah, it goes that way, seemingly all the way through. And yes, a lot of the YouTube comments reflect as such. And it was extremely similar when I listened to it. It's been almost a week since I listened to it, and yeah, I'm laughing again at it now. But yeah, it's pretty comical, and it doesn't help China's reputation here on this front.
It doesn't, but unfortunately, there isn't much that can be done.
No, not practical.
You know, especially when the defendant or potential defendant in some sort of international dispute is the Chinese Olympic Organizing Committee. You know, it's not the kind of thing that the Chinese government is going to be too fond of doing. So you know, it is what it is here.
Yeah, and this is probably as far as it's going. I guess they will let it go. But it was coming eventually. You knew it. I knew it. We all knew it.
I didn't think you were going to go there. I thought you were going to think about doing the pun, but then maybe.
No. You got to dive in at some point. But it's bizarre because, and one of the reasons why I brought this up, and because so many people on my Twitter were interested in it, but also because there was a recent controversy in China involving a movie they released there called The Autobots. It was supposedly a plagiarism of Disney's of Pixar's Cars.
Oh, I thought it would have been Transformers.
You would have. But I was deeply disappointed to find out they'd ripped off Cars instead. It was really very, very wrong to screw that one up, China.
At least rip it off right, China.
Yeah, if you're gonna rip off the right one.
Don't mislead us into thinking it's a super awesome Chinese Transformers.
Which I actually would like that. That'd be interesting. But no, it's just a Cars movie, basically. And it's really, really frustrating because China kind of wants to be this burgeoning cultural center, yet we are constantly hearing about, songs that are basically Chinese versions of Western songs and movies that are, basically plagiarized from Western films. And that doesn't really help the country's reputation as A, respecting copyright, and B, being a cultural powerhouse.
That's right.
And we've seen actually some pretty major shifts in other countries. India, for example, had similar issues, but they've really found a way to come into their own with Bollywood and find their own stories, their own properties to put out there, and are starting to really get the ball rolling. I hope maybe China can do the same. Because remember, Bollywood, when it started out, was like, Indian Spider-Man and movies, and it was stuff like that. They've since, found a lot more creativity and originality out of their homegrown film scene, and I hope that China can do the same.
Well, yeah, India's always had a very robust cultural scene, Bollywood,
yes.
etc. And I'm a fan of their entertainment. But yeah, I believe that brings us to the end of our show here, John. It was a pleasure doing our first international show.
Yes, it was. It was great. And by the way, I must say, Canada looks really nice behind you.
Oh well, I'm just in a nice place. I wish I could. I tried to position it earlier. I think I mentioned this to you before we started taping. I tried to, angle it towards the windows, but it just ended up being glare. But I do have a wonderful view of the city of Montreal from where I'm staying. So. Maybe next time I'll find a way to do it outside so that the listeners and viewers can get a great view of the city.
That sounds good. Well, on that note, everyone, my name is Jonathan Bailey. I am from the site Plagiarism Today, which can be found at plagiarismtoday.com, and I'm username Plagiarism Today, Twitter, Facebook, and all the things.
My name is Evan Sherris, and you can please find me on Twitter. Please send me any messages, engagement, asking questions, do it all.
Yeah.
I'm very open on Twitter. It's at Evan Sherris. And with that note, John, take us away.
On that note, everyone, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.